Venice was not born of conquest, royal decree, or divine prophecy, but of fear. As the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, waves of invasion swept across Italy, Huns, Goths, and Lombards burning cities and tearing apart the old order. Desperate civilians fled not toward fortified walls, but into the shallow lagoons of the Adriatic, a desolate landscape of mudflats, reeds, and shifting waters where no army could easily follow. What began as scattered fishing communities slowly transformed into permanent settlements built on wooden piles driven into the mud, a city quite literally rising from water. Protected by geography rather than walls, Venice survived while the world around it fell apart, learning early that survival depended on adaptation, cooperation, and control of the sea. By the early 8th century, these lagoon communities had grown confident enough to govern themselves, electing their first doge, also Epato, in 726. Though nominally under Byzantine influence, Venice increasingly acted independently, balancing powerful neighbors through diplomacy rather than submission. Attempts by Charlemagne and his successors to seize the city failed, defeated not by armies but by disease and the unforgiving marshes. Venice's isolation became its strength, allowing it to develop a distinct identity and political culture, neither fully Eastern nor Western, but something entirely its own. Trade transformed Venice from refuge to power. Positioned between Europe and the wealthy markets of Byzantium and the Islamic world, Venetian merchants exchanged grain, wine, and timber for spices, silks, and precious goods. Above all else, Venice mastered the trade of salt, the essential preservative of the medieval world, declaring it the true foundation of the state. Wealth flowed into the lagoon, funding ships, diplomacy, and ambition. To elevate the city's spiritual prestige, Venetian merchants smuggled the relics of St. Mark from Alexandria in 828, installing them in a magnificent basilica that would become both a religious and political symbol. The winged lion of St. Mark soon flew over ships and cities across the Adriatic. Commerce demanded protection, and protection demanded power. Venice built a navy not merely to defend itself but to dominate the seas, driving pirates from trade routes and establishing control over strategic ports and islands. Venetian galleys, sleek, oar-powered warships, became instruments of both war and trade. The construction of the arsenal in 1103 marked a revolution in shipbuilding, an industrial complex centuries ahead of its time where standardized parts and organized labor allowed ships to be produced at unprecedented speed. This innovation underpinned Venice's rise as the greatest naval power of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Crusades offered Venice both opportunity and temptation. Acting as transporters and suppliers to crusading armies, Venetians profited immensely while avoiding the ideological fervor that drove others. In 1204, Doge Enrico Dandolo exploited the financial desperation of the Fourth Crusade, redirecting it first against Venice's rivals and ultimately against Constantinople itself. The sack of the greatest Christian city shocked the world, but Venice emerged enriched beyond imagination, seizing territory, trade privileges, and priceless treasures. With Crete and key ports under its control, Venice became an empire in all but name. Empire brought rivalry, especially with Genoa, another maritime republic determined to challenge Venetian supremacy. For more than a century, the two city-states fought brutal wars across the Mediterranean, their fleets clashing from the Black Sea to Sicily. Venice endured setbacks and near catastrophe, most notably when Genoa's forces occupied Chioggia in 1379, threatening the city itself. In a dramatic reversal, Venice trapped and destroyed the Genoese fleet using gunpowder artillery, securing survival at enormous cost. Genoa would never fully recover, while Venice, though exhausted, endured. Stability became Venice's greatest achievement. While much of Europe was ruled by kings claiming divine authority, Venice developed a complex republican system designed to prevent tyranny. Power was dispersed among councils, magistrates, and committees, with the doge reduced to a ceremonial symbol bound by strict laws. Though dominated by a closed noble class, the system proved remarkably durable, producing centuries of internal continuity. Venice supplemented this structure with unmatched diplomacy, maintaining ambassadors across Europe who reported home in coded dispatches, allowing the Republic to anticipate threats long before they arrived. Yet the city could not remain untouched by war. Expansion onto the Italian mainland drew Venice into brutal conflicts with Milan and other powers, fought largely by mercenary armies whose loyalties shifted with coin. Victory brought territory but also entanglement in the wider struggles of Europe. The Italian wars nearly destroyed Venice when a coalition led by the Pope turned against it, excommunicating the Republic and stripping it of lands in a single devastating defeat. Through flexibility, shifting alliances, and relentless diplomacy, Venice survived once more, preserving its core power. Even as war raged, Venice flourished culturally. The Renaissance transformed the city into a center of art, architecture, scholarship, and industry. Painters like Titian and Tintoretto redefined visual expression, architects reshaped the urban landscape, and printers turned Venice into the publishing capital of Europe. Knowledge flowed through its presses just as goods flowed through its ports. The Grand Canal, lined with merchant palaces, became a monument not to kings or saints, but to commerce itself. The greatest challenge came from the east. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 signaled the rise of the Ottoman Empire, whose expanding power threatened Venetian holdings across the Mediterranean. One by one, Venice's eastern possessions fell despite fierce resistance. The brutal siege of Famagusta and the execution of its commander horrified Europe, fueling a Christian alliance that achieved a legendary victory at Lepanto in 1571. Yet despite its symbolic importance, Lepanto failed to reverse the balance of power. Venice's naval dominance faded as Atlantic powers embraced new ship designs and global trade routes that bypassed the Mediterranean entirely. Plague and stagnation accelerated decline. Repeated outbreaks decimated Venice's population, forcing innovations such as quarantine even as they drained the city's strength. The loss of Crete after a 21-year siege marked the final collapse of Venice's overseas empire. By the 18th century, Venice had become a cultural jewel frozen in time, dazzling visitors with art, music, and spectacle while neglecting military and economic reform. The end came swiftly. When Napoleon marched into northern Italy in 1797, Venice stood helpless, unable to defend itself or resist diplomatic pressure. The Republic surrendered without battle. Its symbols were destroyed, its treasures looted, and its 1,000-year independence extinguished. Venice passed from French to Austrian control before becoming part of a unified Italy in the 19th century. Yet Venice did not vanish. Long after its empire fell, the city endured as a symbol of beauty, ingenuity, and resilience. Artists, poets, and travelers continued to find inspiration in its light and water, even as modern challenges, mass tourism, rising seas, and climate change, threaten its future. Once again, Venice stands on the front line of history, a city that has always survived against the odds, facing new battles shaped not by armies or empires, but by the forces of nature itself.